Welcome to Heart Over Gold, the channel where love, kindness, and humanity shine brighter than any fortune. In today's story, in a packed New York courtroom, Victoria Hayes faced her husband, billionaire Alexander Cross, and his confident mistress, Genevieve Morrow. Months of betrayal and legal battles had led to this moment to fight for truth, dignity, and $1 million victory. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments and keep up with our latest stories. The marble floors of the courthouse gleamed like a mirror, each step echoing the heavy tension that clung to the air. Light from the tall glass windows bounced off the polished stone, casting sharp reflections across faces etched with anticipation and unease. Outside, a storm of noise and chaos swirled, cameras flashing in rapid bursts, reporters shouting over one another, microphones jostling for position. The press wasn't just curious, they were hungry for drama, ready to devour the outcome of a case that had already gripped the city. Standing at the center of it all was Genevieve Morrow. She was poised, beautiful, and dressed in a way that suggested she was expecting to win. Her designer coat framed her figure perfectly, her dark hair smoothed into place, her confident smile just a little too certain. She was the mistress, the other woman waiting for a verdict she believed would secure her future. To her mind, this was the day Alexander Cross, billionaire industrialist and the man she claimed to love, would finally be hers without condition. She was sure the life she had been promised was just minutes away. But beyond the glare of cameras, inside the hushed courtroom, another figure stood in striking contrast. Victoria Hayes, the wife, a woman who had known love, loyalty, and betrayal in equal measure. She was no longer naive, no longer willing to be ignored. Her composure was unshakable, her eyes cold but calm, as though she had been preparing for this moment far longer than anyone realized. That this was not just another divorce proceeding. What was about to unfold was a slow, deliberate, unraveling, calculated game of strategy that mixed deception, betrayal, and the kind of revenge only a woman who had been underestimated for decades could execute. It was the story of how someone the world believed had everything to lose instead walked away with more than she could have imagined, leaving a powerful man and his mistress to choke on the taste of their own arrogance. Alexander Cross was a man whose reputation preceded him. To the business world, he was untouchable, a titan whose empire, Cross Industries, reached into aerospace technology, luxury real estate, international shipping, and beyond. His sharp features had graced the covers of countless financial magazines, his counsel sought by political leaders and corporate boards alike. He was the golden figure of modern capitalism, the man whose every move turned profit into legend. And beside him for 25 years had been Victoria. She had been more than just a wife, she had been a partner in his rise. Though no one outside their inner circle ever noticed, she played her role flawlessly, hosting elegant dinners, smoothing over tense investor meetings with charm, and raising their 2 children, the perfect heir and the dependable spare, in a sprawling Hamptons. A state that looked more like a curated museum than a family home. It was a world of luxury and silent rules. A world Victoria had accepted because it was the price of belonging to Alexander's world. The cracks in their perfect facade didn't erupt in scandal at first. They crept in quietly, like hairline fractures in glass. A wrong number on Alexander's phone late at night, a credit card charge from a boutique Victoria had never stepped foot in. The faint trace of an unfamiliar, expensive perfume lingering on the shoulder of his suit jacket. Alexander's explanations came quickly, smoothly, excuses crafted by a man who made his living persuading others. A business dinner that ran long, a gift for a client's wife, a harmless encounter in a crowded elevator. Victoria, trained after years to trust the image over the truth, nodded along. To challenge him would mean admitting to herself that something was crumbling beneath her feet. But whispers have a way of becoming noise, and soon the signs could no longer be brushed aside. The headlines began. Grainy paparazzi shots. Alexander, laughing on the deck of a yacht off the Amalfi Coast with a woman who was most certainly not his wife. Another photo, Alexander, arm wrapped around that same woman, leaving a lavish hotel in Rome. The mystery woman's identity quickly surfaced. Genevieve Morrow, a French art gallery owner, 20 years younger, with wide, deceptively innocent eyes and a body draped in couture like it was poured on. For Victoria, the humiliation was like nothing she had endured before. She had lived through years of his emotional distance, his obsession with work that made her feel like one more acquisition in his portfolio. But this was different. This was public. This was Alexander declaring to the world that she was no longer enough. The high society women who once envied her now gave her pitying smiles. their sympathy sharp enough to cut. When the confrontation finally came, it didn't explode in shouting or tears. It happened in the cold grandeur of their living room. Walls lined with art they had chosen together over decades, art that now felt like a gallery of lies. Victoria, holding a glossy magazine with Alexander and Genevieve smiling on its cover, asked one simple question: who is she? Alexander, practical as ever, didn't waste time with denial. Her name is Genevieve Moreau, he said, his tone flat, his eyes unflinching. I'm in love with her. The words dropped like lead into the silence, heavier than the crystal chandelier overhead, and in that moment something in Victoria shifted. The years of suspicion, of restless nights and gnawing doubt, solidified into perfect clarity. The tremor beneath her life became an earthquake, tearing away what was left of the illusion. I want a divorce, she replied, her voice even surprisingly even. Alexander had expected an outburst, perhaps tears or a shattered vase. Instead, she was steady, composed. For the first time in years, he truly looked at her, and what he saw wasn't a defeated wife, but a woman forged in steel. Fine, he said, irritation flickering in his voice. My lawyers will be in touch with yours. He left without another word, footsteps fading into the echoing halls, leaving Victoria alone in the ornate cage they had called home. That night, rain hammered the Hamptons estate in unrelenting sheets, but Victoria didn't cry. She picked up the phone and dialed a number she hadn't used in years. The man who answered, Simon Davies, a retired forensic accountant who had once worked for her father, was quiet for a beat after hearing her voice. I have a job for you, she said, her tone steady, almost cold. I want you to find everything, every shell company, every offshore account, every hidden asset. I want Alexander's empire dismantled, piece by piece. On the other end, Simon's voice held the faintest edge of satisfaction. It would be my pleasure. And with that the game began. They presented Diana Thorne with an initial offer, a one-time payment of $50 million, plus the Hamptons estate, and a small stock portfolio. It was a fortune by any normal standard, but it was a pittance compared to Alexander's true wealth. Diana Thorne, as predicted, rejected the offer out of hand. Mr. Cross's offer is an insult to me client, she declared in a letter that dripped with icy disdain. We will not be intimidated by his attempts to hide his assets. We are prepared to go to trial, and we are confident the court will see this for what it is. A blatant attempt to defraud a woman who has dedicated 25 years of her life to his success. Alexander was amused by Thaleta's tone. She's bluffing, he told his lead attorney, a man named Muckerstorn. She has no idea what I'm worth. Give her a little more, another 10 million. She'll take it. But Victoria wasn't bluffing. While Alexander's lawyers were busy preparing what they thought would be a simple, straightforward case, Victoria's team was working in the shadows, meticulously building their case, brick by brick. Simon Davies had unearthed a complex web of financial deception that even he, a seasoned veteran of forensic accounting, found impressive in its audacity. He had traced the flow of money through a dizzying array of offshore accounts in jurisdictions known for their secrecy. The Cayman Islands, Panama, Liechtenstein. He had discovered shell corporations with names like Pegasus Holdings and Orion Investments. Entities that existed only on paper. Their sole purpose was to hold Alexander's hidden wealth. One of his most significant discoveries was a trust Alexander had set up in the Cook Islands, a remote Pacific nation with some of the strongest asset protection laws in the world. The trust, named the Jupiter Trust, held hundreds of millions of dollars in assets, including a portfolio of blue-chip stocks, a collection of rare classic cars, and a private jet. It was a fortress designed to be impenetrable, a financial black hole from which money could never be extracted. Or so Alexander thought. Meanwhile, Sarah Jenkins had continued her investigation into Genevieve Moreau's art gallery. She had cultivated a source, a disgruntled former employee of the gallery, who had been fired for asking too many questions. The former employee, a young art history graduate named Sophie, confirmed Sarah. She told Sarah that Genevieve knew next to nothing about art, that the true mastermind behind the gallery's operations was Alexander himself. Sophie described how Alexander would purchase paintings from obscure artists at low prices, then use a network of experts to create a fake provenance and inflate their value. The paintings would then be sold to one of Alexander's shell corporations at the inflated price, creating a paper trail that made it look as if the gallery was a legitimate, profitable business. The artwork itself was then used as collateral for loans, which Alexander would then funnel back into his hidden accounts. Though, the most damning piece of evidence Sophie provided was a set of coded emails between Alexander and Genevieve. Emails Sophie had secretly copied before she was fired. The emails, disguised as lovers' chatter, were in fact a detailed log of their money laundering scheme. Discuss our little project, the beautiful canvases that hold our secrets, and the new masterpiece that will soon join our collection, they read. It was a smoking gun, a clear and indelible record of their conspiracy. Armed with this mountain of evidence, Diana Thorne prepared for depositions. A deposition is a crucial part of the discovery process, a chance for lawyers to question the opposing party and their witnesses under oath. It's a high-stackious match, a battle of wits, where a single misstep can have devastating. The first to be deposed was Genevieve Morrow. She arrived at Diana Thorne's office looking every bit the glamorous art dealer, dressed in a sleek Chanel suit, her confidence unshaken, but her composure soon began to crumble under Diana's relentless questioning. Diana started with the basics, asking Genevieve about her background, her education, her experience in the art world. Genevieve's answers were vague and evasive. When Diana pressed her foretales for specifics about the artists she represented, the galleries she had worked for, the art fairs she had attended, Genevieve's ignorance became painfully obvious. Then Diana moved on to the gallery's finances. He presented Genevieve with bank statements, sales records, and appraisal documents, all of which had been provided by Simon Davies. She asked Genevieve to explain the astronomical prices of some of the paintings, the questionable provenance of others, the series of transactions with offshore corporations. Genevieve, who had been coached by Alexander's lawyers to plead ignorance, stuck to her script. I'm not a numbers person, she said with a dismissive wave of her hand. I leave the financial side of the business to my accountants. Finally, Diana pulled out the coda mails, the ones provided by Sophie. She read them aloud, her voice calm and measured, letting the damning words hang in the air. Genevieve's face went white, the color drained from her cheeks, her carefully constructed facade shattered like a dropped vase. She looked at her eyes wide with panic, but there was nothing he could do to save her. She was trapped, her lies exposed for all to see. The deposition was a disaster for Alexander's case. Genevieve, the woman he intended to marry, had been revealed as a key figure in his scheme to defraud his wife. That beautiful, adoring art dealer was now a co-conspirator, a liability that threatened to bring his entire house of cards down. When Alexander was informed of the deposition's outcome, his amusement turned to cold fury. He had underestimated Victoria, her intelligence, her resolve, her ruthlessness. He had thought he was playing checkers, but he was in a game of chess, and he was losing. The storm that had been brewing had finally broken, and Alexander Cross, the man who had always been in control, was now caught in its eye. The trial was still weeks away, but the first battle had been fought, and Victoria Hayes had won. Do you think Genevieve deserved to be exposed in this manner? How blinded was Alexander by his own arrogance? Leave your comments and don't forget to subscribe for the next twist in this saga. The fallout from Genevieve's disastrous deposition sent a shockwave through Alexander's camp. His lawyers, who had been so confidential, were now in a state of barely concealed panic. They advised Alexander to settle, to offer Victoria a much larger sum of money to make everything go away. But Alexander, his pride wounded, and his arrogance intact, refused. I will not be blackmailed by my own wife, he snapped. We will go tutorial, we will fight, and we will win. It was a decision born of hubris, a fatal miscalculation that would ultimately seal his fate. He still believed he could outmaneuver Victoria, that heckled use his wealth and power to crush her. He decided to play his trump card, the one he had been holding in reserve, the one he believed would be his ultimate weapon, his son, Alexander Cross Jr., known to all as Alex. Alex was 24 years old, a recent business school graduate who had just started working for his father's company. He was a golden boy, handsome, charming, and fiercely loyal to his father. He had grown up idolizing Alexander, seeing him not just as a father, but as a hero, a giant among men. He had been shielded from the ugliness of his parents' marriage, from his father's infidelities, from his mother's desperation. Alexander summoned Alex to his office, a vast imposing space on the top floor of the Cross Industries building with panoramic views of the city. He painted a picture of Victoria as a vindictive, greedy woman, a woman who was trying to destroy him, to destroy the company, to destroy their family's legacy. Your mother is not the woman you think she is, Alexander said, his voice laden with a carefully crafted sense of sadness and betrayal. She's being manipulated by her lawyers, greedy sharks who are only interested in a big payday. They've poisoned her mind against me. She is trying to ruin me, and if she ruins me, she ruins you. Alexander needed Alex to testify on his behalf, to tell the court how wonderful a father he had been, how loving and supportive he had always tried to be as a husband. He needed Alex to paint a picture of Victoria as a cold and distant mother, a woman more interested in her social life than in her own family. Alex, who had always seen his father as infallible, was easily swayed. He was hurt and confused by the divorce, and his father's words preyed on his insecurities. He agreed to testify against his own mother, a decision that would have devastating consequences. Victoria was heartbroken when she learned of Alex's decision. Her son, the boy she had raised, the one she had protected from the harsh realities of their marriage, was now siding with the man who had betrayed them both. It was a betrayal that cut deeper than any of Alexander's. Their daughter, a fiercely independent young woman named Charlotte, who was studying art history in London, was furious. She flew home immediately, confronting her brother in an angry, tearful argument. "How could you?" Cha screamed. "How could you do this to Mom after everything she's been through, after everything he's done to her? You didn't understand." Alex stammered, his usual confidence fading. "Dad isn't the bad guy here. Mom is the one who's trying to destroy everything. He's been to you, Alex," Charlotte cried. "He's been lying to us our whole lives. Can't you see that?" But Alex, blinded by his loyalty to his father, refused to listen. The battle lines had been drawn, not just in the courtroom but within the Caldwell family itself. The trial began on a cold, grey November morning. The courtroom was packed with reporters, high society gossips, and a smattering curious onlookers. Genevieve Morrow, a shadow of her former self, was also there, sitting in the back row, her face hidden behind dark sunglasses. The first few days of the trial were a blur of legal arguments and witness testimony. Alexander's lawyers did their best to portray him as a victim, a loving husband and father who was being ruined by a greedy, vindictive wife. They called a parade of witnesses, friends, business associates, even Thefamily's former housekeeper, all of whom testified to Alexander's good character. Then it was Alex's turn to take the stand. He looked handsome and confident in his tailored suit, a younger, more reverent version of his father. He spoke eloquently about his father's generosity, his love for his family, his dedication to his company. He painted a picture of a happy, loving family, a picture he knew deep down was a lie. Then Diana Thorne began her cross-examination. At first it was soft, asking Alex about his childhood, his relationship with his mother, but then her questions became more pointed, more probing. She asked him about the family vacations where his father was always on the phone, the school events his father had missed, the holidays his father had spent on business. Then she pulled out a series of emails and text messages, Alex and his mother, messages that painted a very different picture of their relationship. Messages where Alex complained to his mother about his father's absence, where he thanked her for her unwavering support, where he told her that she was the only one who truly understood him. Alex's carefully constructed testimony began to fall apart. He stammered. He contradicted himself. He looked to his father for help, but Alexander could do nothing but watch his face, a mask of cold fury. The final blow came when Diana Thorne presented a copy of a trust document, a trust Alexander had set up for Alex and Charlotte. The trust would be funded upon Alexander's death, but there was a clause, a cruel, vindictive clause that stated if Victoria ever remarried, both Alex and Charlotte would be dead. The courtroom fell silent as Diana read the clause aloud. Alex stared at the document in disbelief, his face pale. He had never known of this clause. He looked at his father, his eyes pleading for an explanation, but Alexander just stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched. In that moment, the scales fell from Alex's eyes. He saw his father not as a hero, but as a manipulative, controlling man who would use his own children as pawns in his twisted games. He saw the truth of his mother's words, the truth his sister had tried to show him. He had been a fool, a blind, trusting fool. Tears welled in his eyes as he looked at his mother. "I'm so sorry, Mom," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I am so sorry." Her son's betrayal had backfired. Alexander's ultimate weapon had blown up in his face, and in the process had revealed the true depths of his cruelty. The trial was far from over, but the tide had turned, and now it was turning irrevocably in Victoria's favor. What do you think of Alexander's attempt to use his own son? Was Alex break down on the stand a victory for Victoria or a family tragedy? Comment below and share this video if the tension has you on the edge of your seat. The verdict. The courtroom was still reeling from Alex's emotional breakdown on the witness stand. The image of the golden boy crying and apologizing to his mother was a powerful one, and it had a profound impact on everyone present, including the judge. Alexander Cross, the industry titan, the master of the universe, suddenly seemed small and pathetic. His legal team was in disarray. Their star witness had not only imploded, but he had also provided the prosecution with a piece of explosive evidence, the vindictive clause in the children's trust. The clause was a clear indication of Alexander's malice, his desire to control and punish Victoria even after their divorce. The next witness to be called was Simon Davies, the soft-spoken forensic accountant who had been Victoria's secret weapon all along. He walked to the stand with a quiet confidence, carrying a stack of folders filled with financial documents. For the next 2 days, he patiently and methodically led the court through Alexander's complex web of financial deception. He explained in clear, simple terms how Alexander had used a network of offshore corporations to hide hundreds of millions of dollars. He presented charts and graphs that traced the flow of money from Chicago to the Cayman Islands, from London to the Cook Islands. He showed the court how Alexander had systematically undervalued the assets of Cross Industries, siphoning off profits into his hidden accounts. Then he focused his attention on the Jupiter Trust, the fortress in the Cook Islands that Alexander believed was impenetrable. Simon explained that while the Cook Islands' asset protection laws were indeed formidable, they were not inspired. He had found a loophole, a small crack in the fortress walls. The trust had been created after Alexander had already begun his affair with Genevieve Morrow, and Simon argued that this constituted a fraudulent conveyance, an attempt to move assets out of the reach of a creditor in this case. Victoria, Alexander's lawyers objected vehemently, but the judge, a shrewd and seasoned jurist named Judge Catherine Miller, overruled them. She was intrigued by Simon's argument and allowed him to continue. Simon then presented the court with his final piece of evidence, Theon, that would prove to be the nail in Alexander's coffin. It was a recorded phone call, a call Alexander had made to his banker in the Cook Islands just a few weeks before the trial began. The call had been legally obtained through a subpoena, and on it one could hear Alexander's own voice instructing his banker to move the assets from the Jupiter Trust to a new, even more secret jurisdiction. The courtroom listened in stunned silence as Alexander's arrogant, confident voice filled the room. "I don't care what it costs," he said on the recording. "Just make sure that money is gone. I'd rather burn it than give her a single cent." The recording was a bombshell. It was irrefutable proof of Alexander's intent to defraud his wife, to hide his assets, to obstruct justice. It was proof of a man who believed he was above the law, a man who was about to be taught a very harsh lesson. When the recording ended, there was a collective gasp from the courtroom. All eyes turned to Alexander. He sat frozen in his chair, his face a ghastly white. The titan had been bowed to his knees. The master of deception had been undone by his own words. The rest of the trial was a formality. Alexander's lawyers, with their case in tatters, could do little more than go through the motions. They tried to discredit Simon Davies, to portray him as a disgruntled former employee with a vendetta against Alexander, but Simon's testimony was too well documented. His evidence was too overwhelming. Finally, it was Victoria's turn to take the stand. She walked to the witness stand with a quiet dignity, her composure unshaken. She didn't talk about Alexander's infidelities or her own personal pain, but about the 25 years she had dedicated to her marriage, to her family, to building his empire. She talked about the nights she had spent waiting for him to come home from the office, the business dinner she had hosted, the clients she had charmed. She talked about the sacrifices she had made, the dreams she had put on hold, the life she had lived in his shadow. Her testimony wasn't emotional, but it was powerful. It was the story of a woman who had been a true partner, excellent partner in every sense of the word. And it was the story of a woman who was now demanding her due. When she was finished, there was a profound silence in the courtroom. Even Judge Miller, a woman who had seen it all, seemed moved. She looked at Victoria with a new respect, a new understanding. She didn't see a victim, but a survivor, a woman of strength and resilience. Their closing arguments were brief. Diana Thorne, in a masterful summation, laid out the evidence of Alexander's massive fraud, his calculated cruelty, his blatant disregard for the law. Alexander's lawyer, in a last desperate effort, tried to portray Victoria as a woman consumed by greed and revenge, but it was too late. The evidence was overwhelming. The tide had turned. The crumbling of Atherton was complete. All that remained was for the judge to render her verdict. Did Simon Davies' testimony live up to your expectations? Was Victoria's final speech a masterstroke? Tell us what you think in the comments. The final showdown. On the day the verdict was to be delivered, the air in the Chicago courthouse was so thick with tension it felt like a physical weight. Every seat was taken. The benches groaned under the collective attention of reporters, high society gossips who had followed the trial with religious fervor, and law students, eager to witness legal history. In the front row, the flashes of the cameras glinted off the stoic faces of Victoria's team. She sat between Diana Thorne and Simon Davies, a portrait of unnerving calm. Her hands were carefully folded in her lap, but Diana could see the faint rhythmic clenching of her knuckles. It was the only sign of the tempest raging inside her. Across the aisle sat the wreckage of Alexander Cross's life. His expensive suit hung on him, his figure diminished. The confident Titan was gone, replaced by a hollow man with haunted eyes. He stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched so tight a muscle was throbbing erratically in his cheek. His legal team whispered nervously at his side, shuffling papers that were now completely useless. In the back row, a ghost in a dark coat, was Genevieve Morrow. She looked small and anonymous. Stripped of her glamour, a spectator at the public execution of the life she had so desperately coveted. A sharp rap of a gavel announced the judge's arrival. All rise. The bass voice boomed, and the courtroom came to its feet with a scrape. Judge Catherine Miller entered, her black robe billowing behind her. She moved with a deliberate, unhurried rhythm that seemed to suck the remaining oxygen out of the room. She was a woman who understood the gravity of power, and today she wielded it in absolute terms. Taking her seat, she surveyed the courtroom. Her gaze swept over the faces before her, lingering a fraction of a second longer on Alexander. It was a look devoid of pity, a look of pure, unadulterated assessment. "I have reached a verdict," she began, her voice crisp and clear, cutting through the silence. The entire courtroom leaned forward a second. This has been a long and difficult trial. Divorce proceedings often are. They expose the sad, sordid details of a marriage that has tragically broken down. But what has unfolded in this courtroom over the last several weeks is something far more disturbing than a simple, marital dissolution. This has been a trial about profound greed, systematic deception, and a shocking and inconceivable abuse of power. Alexander flinched as if he had been struck. The color drained from his face. Judge Miller put on a pair of reading glasses and looked down at the thick document before her. "Let us first address the matter of Cross Industries and its valuation. The defense has argued this is a complex global corporation subject to market fluctuations. This is true. However, the evidence presented by Mr. Davies has shown with meticulous and irrefutable clarity that Marcos has engaged in a deliberate campaign to artificially devalue his own company for the purposes of these proceedings. The network of shell corporations, from Pegasus Holdings to Orion Investments, were not legitimate business entities. They were instruments of fraud designed to siphon hundreds of millions of dollars away from the marital estate." She paused, looking straight at the jury box, now empty, as if addressing the conscience of the community. "Then we have the matter of the art gallery owned and operated by Ms. Genevieve Morrow. In the back." Genevieve shrank further into her coat. "This court finds that the gallery was not a legitimate business, but a sophisticated front for money laundering. The coded emails between Mr. Cross and Ms. Morrow discussing beautiful canvases that hold our secrets were not lovers' flirtations, but communications between conspirators. The scheme to purchase art at low cost, fraudulently inflate its value, and sell it to Mr. Cross's own shell corporations is one of the most brazen attempts to hide assets this court has ever seen." Victoria closed her eyes for a moment. It was vindication, plain and simple. Every suspicion, every silent fear she had harbored for years was being validated, spoken aloud in this temple of justice. The judge turned a page. But the deception was not merely financial, it was personal, and it was cruel. "I refer now to the Jupiter Trust established in the Cook Islands, and more specifically to the clause regarding this marriage's children, Alexander Cross Jr. and Charlotte Cross." She looked over her glasses to include a provision that would disinherit your own children, should their mother choose to remarry, is not merely controlling, it is an act of stunning malice. It is a testament to a man so consumed by his own ego that he would use his children as weapons in a campaign of personal revenge. It is quite frankly morally reprehensible. Next to his mother, Alex squeezed her hand, tears in his eyes. It was the final public confirmation of the truth he had so painfully come to accept. Therefore, Judge Miller continued, her voice hardening, This court must now render a judgment that not only compensates Ms. Pays for her 25 years as a partner in this marriage and this enterprise, but also punishes Mr. Cross for his egregious conduct. She began with the undisputed assets, the Hamptons estate, the Park Avenue apartment, the stock portfolio, the fleet of cars, all awarded to the plaintiff, Victoria Hayes. A low murmur ran through the room. It was a clean sweep, but it was only the appetizer. Now, the judge said, her voice dropping slightly, creating a dramatic silence, we turn to the hidden assets, the funds held in offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, Panama, and Liechtenstein. The assets held by the network of shell corporations, the total fraudulently appraised value of the art collection, and the entirety of the Jupiter Trust, which this court finds to be a fraudulent conveyance. After a careful review of the forensic accounting provided by Mr. Davies, this court values these hidden marital assets at approximately $1.2 billion. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. Alexander's face was now a ghastly white. He looked as if he was going to be sick. Given the scale of the fraud perpetrated by the defendant, Judge Miller declared, her voice ringing with authority, and his attempts to deceive this court and defraud his wife, my judgment is that these assets be divided as follows. She paused, letting the moment hang in the air, a sword suspended by a 30% to the defendant, Mr. Alexander Cross. The room held its breath, and 70% to the plaintiff, Ms. Victoria Hayes. Pandemonium. The word erupted in the courtroom. A reporter in the back shouted, the sound of a dozen laptops clicking at once. The air 70%. It wasn't just a win, it was an annihilation, a punishment of biblical proportions. Alexander slumped in his chair as if his being had dissolved. His lawyer put a hand on his shoulder, but he was staring into the abyss that had just opened up beneath his feet. But Judge Miller wasn't finished. She held up a hand for silence. Furthermore, she said, her eyes fixed on Alexander, Mr. Krauss will be responsible for the entirety of Ms. Hayes' legal and forensic accounting fees, and given the defendant's blatant attempts to obstruct justice and committery before this court, I am left with no alternative. She looked at the federal prosecutor who had been watching the trial from the front row. This court refers this entire matter, including all evidence and testimony, to the United States Attorney's Office for the Northern District of Illinois for an immediate criminal investigation. It was the final devastating blow. A death blow. Alexander Cross was no longer just a ruined divorce. He was a future criminal. His lawyer's jaw went slack. Financial devastation was one thing. The prospect of prison was under entirely. Court is adjourned, Judge Miller said, striking the gavel with a loud final crack that echoed across the crumbling of an empire. As she swept out of the room, the court erupted. Reporters climbed onto benches shouting questions. Victoria, her face wet with tears of relief and vindication, fell into the arms of Diana Thorne, who was grinning. Simon Davies clapped her on the back, a rare wide smile on his face. Alex hugged them all, a family reborn in the crucible of the trial. As Victoria and her team pushed their way through the crowd, she looked back one last time. Alexander was still sitting at the defendant's table, completely alone. His lawyers were already packing their briefcases, distancing themselves from the radioactive fallout of their client. He looked small, pathetic, a king without a kingdom, a man who had of everything, and in his insatiable greed, had lost it all. Mistress had waited outside for a victory, but the wife had just walked away with justice. What did you think of the judge's verdict? Did you think Alexander would receive such a severe punishment? Leave your opinion and share this story if it left you breathless. A new legacy built on purpose. In the aftermath of the verdict, the world that had once revolved around Alexander Cross didn't just wobble. It spun off its axis and disintegrated into a million pieces. The headlines were savage. A public crucifixion for a man who had once been worshipped at the altar of capitalism. Titan takedown. The Chicago Sun-Times screamed, from mansion to prison, Caldwell's empire crumbles. The Financial Times reported, the man HOA's once a king, whose every pronouncement moved markets, was now a whispered cautionary tale in boardrooms, a symbol of hubris and its inevitable spectacular fall. The U.S. Attorney's Office handed a case on a silver platter by Victoria's team, moved with a speed and ferocity that astonished even seasoned legal observers. Faced with a mountain of irrefutable evidence, the offshore accounts, the fraudulent art appraisals, and the damning recording of his own voice, Alexander was cornered. His high-priced lawyers, now dealing with a federal indictment, advised him his only option to avoid spending the rest of his life in prison was to cooperate. The arrogance finally shattered. In a quiet federal courtroom, stripped off his tailored suits and looking frail in a standard-issue prison jumpsuit, Alexander Cross pleaded guilty to conspiracy, wire fraud, and tax evasion. The judge, unmoved by his lawyers' pleas for leniency, sentenced him to 10 years in a medium-security federal penitentiary. The fall from grace was absolute. The man who once flew on a private jet was now shuffling in shackles. His new home was not a sprawling estate, but an 8 by 10 feet cell. His new associates, not outshines senators, but convicted felons. In the first few months, he tried to exert his old power to bribe guards and manipulate inmates, but his currency was as here. He was just a number, a ghost of a man, haunted by the echoes of a life he had arrogantly thrown away. Cross Industries, the juggernaut he had built, could not survive the stain of its founder. The stock plummeted to junk status overnight. Investors, terrified of further scandal, pulled out in a mass exodus. The board of directors, in a desperate act of self-preservation, purged his name from the letterhead and forced his resignation. The company was dismembered like a carcass, its division sold off to competitors for pennies on the dollar. It was a sad, ignominious end to a once great empire, dismantled as thoroughly as Simon Davies had dismantled its financial statements. Genevieve Morrow, the beautiful, ambitious mistress, became a pariah. Faced with her unindictment, she agreed to testify against Alexander in exchange for a lighter sentence. Her story, a blend of greed, naive, and willful blindness, painted a pathetic picture. She was sentenced to 2 years of probation and 500 hours of community service. The Chanel suits were replaced by an orange vest she wore while cleaning graffiti from subway walls. Her art gallery was ized, her collection of fraudulent masterpieces, auctioned off by the government. She disappeared from public view, a footnote in the epic downfall she had helped precipitate. Her name forever linked to the scandal that had destroyed them all. And what of Victoria? She walked out of that courtroom with a fortune so vast it was almost abstract, but more than the money, she walked out with her freedom, a concept she was only just beginning to grasp. The first few weeks were disorienting. For 25 years, her life had been dictated by Alexander's schedule, his needs and his ambitions. Now there was only silence. The first act of her new life was to sell the Hamptons estate. The sprawling mansion with its cold marble floors and rooms felt like a mausoleum. She let the auction house take everything, the furniture, the art they had collected, the monuments to a life that had been a lie. She kept nothing but her personal belongings and a few photographs of her children as innocent toddlers. With the proceeds, she purchased a magnificent brownstone in Lincoln Park, a neighborhood that throbbed with life, art, and authenticity. It was the opposite of her old life in every way. Instead of manicured lawns, it had a small, wild garden. Instead of a formal dining room, it had a large open kitchen that was always filled with the aroma of fresh coffee and newly baked bread. Her daughter, Charlotte, who had been her fierce advocate, became her partner. With Charlotte's expertise in artistry and Victoria's newfound business acumen, they established the Victoria Hayes Foundation. Its mission was simple, yet revolutionary: to find and fund the brilliant women who were being overlooked and underestimated, a world still dominated by men. They poured millions into scholarships for female artists, grants for women-owned tech, startups, and seed capital for female entrepreneurs. The foundation wasn't just a charity, it was an engine of change powered by the very fortune a man had tried to hide from a woman. One of their first projects was saving a struggling gallery in Wicker Park that showcased the work of immigrant women artists. The gallery was on the verge of closing its doors. The foundation stepped in, not just with a check, but with a team of mentors and business advisors. Victoria stood at the gallery's reopening, surrounded by vibrant, powerful art, and felt a sense of purpose that 1,000 social galash never given her. Her relationship with her son Alexa underwent a profound healing. The trial had been a brutal awakening for him, shattering the idol he had worshipped. Filled with guilt, he left the corporate world he had been groomed for and went back to school, earning a master's degree in social work. He now worked at a community center in the Bronx, dedicating his life to helping at-risk teenagers. He and Victoria met for lunch every week, their conversations filled with a new honesty and mutual respect. The bond once broken by betrayal was now forged in the fires of truth and forgiveness. On a gray afternoon, a letter arrived at the Lincoln Park brownstone. The postmark was from a federal prison in Pennsylvania. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it. It was from Alexander. Thelator was a rambling, self-pitying diatribe, blaming her, the judge, his lawyers, everyone but himself for his downfall. It ended by begging for money, a fraction of the fortune she now controlled. The old Victoria might have felt a pang of pity, a flicker of residual obligation, but the woman she was now simply folded the letter and slid it into the fireplace. As she watched the paper curl and blacken, turning to ash, she felt Thelust's final link to her old life break. He had no power over her anymore. Victoria Hayes, the woman once known only as the billionaire's wife, had risen from the ashes of her marriage, not as a vengeful fury, but as a creator, a builder, a force for good. She had taken the pain and transformed the stolen money and sanctified it. She was often seen walking the streets of her neighborhood, a quiet smile on her face, no longer defined by the man she had married, but by the woman she had become. The world had watched a mistress wait outside a courthouse, hoping to see a wife destroyed. Instead, they had witnessed the birth of a queen. The 70% of the fortune was just seed money. Her true empire, built on integrity, purpose, and an unbreakable spirit, was only just beginning. The story of Victoria Hayes is a powerful reminder that the scales of justice, though they may be slow to balance, eventually do. It is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the quiet, unbreakable strength of a woman who refused to be a victim. Victoria's journey from being a silent partner in a gilded cage to being the detective, her own destiny, is a masterclass in strategy, patience, and unwavering resolve. She proved that the greatest power is not in wealth or status, but in knowing your own worth and having the courage to fight for it. If this story of betrayal, brilliant revenge, and ultimate triumph resonate with you, please like this video too. Show your support. Share it with others. We appreciate a story where the underdog, armed with intelligence and integrity, comes out victorious.